You're tuned into the Unnecessary Harm podcast, where we drill down on issues of substance use and its cultural impact. Your host, Shane Varcoe, Executive Director of the Delgado Institute, with over 40 years experience in youth and community work and a passion for building resilience.
Hey, welcome back to the Unnecessary Harm podcast. As always, great to have you with us. For those returning subscribers, good to have you back as always. And of course, those chiming in for the first time, welcome on board. Hope you get out of this what we hope to deliver today. Well, today's guest created one of America's most successful prevention campaigns and has spent decades mobilising communities against drug use. John is the Executive Director of Community Alliances for Drug-Free Youth, a California started and expanding prevention organisation working since 1980. He's also the former Director of Demand Reduction for California's high-intensity drug trafficking areas, which is a program under the White House direction. In 1986, CADFI created California's first statewide Red Ribbon Week campaign. It became the oldest and largest drug prevention campaign in the United States for decades, now observed nationally every October. Under his leadership, CADFI has sponsored over 300 two youth conferences across California alone, and established cross-border prevention initiatives along the California-Mexico corridor, which we're going to drill down into a bit later on. And with degrees from Texas A&M University and San Diego State University, he not only has a robust academic credential, but credentials harnessed and powerfully engaged in real-world community-shifting action. John Redman, welcome to the Unnecessary Harm podcast.
Why, thank you for having me.
Mate, brilliant. It's been too long, and it's an engagement long in the waiting, and I'm glad you've been able to make some space because I know lots going on in your world. Well, let's kick in because I really want to get the conversation going around a lot of your experience, the journey you've had in this arena of drug policy, prevention, recovery, supply reduction. There's a vast experience and depth of knowledge that we probably won't be able to drill down into every aspect of that today in our conversation, but we're going to give it a crack. We're going to give it a red hot go. Anyway, but you want to kind of kick off with a bit of a monologue here, because one of the rules of product development is always creating and fueling demand. Anyone who's in business and marketing understands that. Next to no one continues to manufacture a product that nobody uses. However, there is at least one product that is almost guaranteed to succeed once engagement has been achieved, and that is the addiction for profit products, substances, whether illicit or licit. And as the marketers know, regardless of the product, that if you want to be in business in 20 years' time, you need to market to kids. Now, this is no more true than with the addiction for profit merchandise. Literally capturing the developing brain is the gold standard of that industry. Now, you've worked extensively in demand and supply reduction, John. And what I wanted to do to kick us off, to get our listeners some sort of an insight into not just how you're wired, but some of the journey, and we're going to talk at length, hopefully, about some of the experiences you've had. But you stepped into the prevention space, but that was soon followed by stepping into the demand reduction space with HIDA. And now, supply reduction and demand reduction, from our perspective and from any policy perspective, they're a perfect pairing. They go hand in hand. They work well together. So tell us about how you started, all this started for you, and particularly about the journey into this space and how it's evolved into the space where you work for the White House.
Sure. Oh, and one other thing, I also have a Doctor of Divinity. I am a man of God.
Ah, okay. I did not put that in. I thought that was there, but okay.
That's okay. No, but so a lot of my work comes from my faith.
Okay.
So it's very important to me.
Indeed.
I actually went to college undergraduate was technical theater, and then my graduate degree was in design for theater, television, and film. And I worked in that industry for over 20 years, about 20 years. Yeah, 20 years, 1980 to 2000, 2001. And I had worked my way up to where I was just a producer. And the further I rose in the ranks, the further away from the art I became. And
Uh-huh. Uh,
I remember going into a rehearsal one day. I just wanted to feel the art again. And I went in there, and just my presence disrupted everything. They kind of stopped, and one of the assistant producers came up. What? I'm sorry. Is there something you need, Mr. Redman? This and that. I just my presence completely destroyed that rehearsal. So I said, no, I was just checking on something. I'll leave now, and I left. And it was at that point, plus all the late nights and the grueling work. My kids were growing up, and I rarely saw them at night. I felt I needed a change. That this wasn't the place for me anymore. And so I prayed about it, but I had gotten a job, this interim job where I was running a computer tech company. I did that for about a year, cashed out, and I didn't have to work for a while. And so somebody had called me up and said, hey, one of my former employees, they were looking for a job, and I was helping them to create a campaign, just a marketing campaign for themselves to get a job. And we went to the library to look for some things, and I had prayed that day to God again, and I went into the library, and I was showing them different periodicals, and in this business journal was this job, and they were looking. It was a national. It was a national campaign, but a search. But I looked at that and said, I think I'll go just talk to them, and it was an interview, and I wasn't really looking to get hired. I was just looking to talk, but they hired me. Fortunately or unfortunately for them.
you go.
And at that time, the organization was working. It was housed at the Haida, still is, and that's when I was starting to understand. I didn't know anything about demand reduction. I didn't know anything about supply reduction. I was
Yeah.
a babe in the woods.
Yeah. This is not your wheelhouse at all. Yeah. Wow.
But what they thought was anybody that can bring, artists, directors, designers, stage managers together and keep something on time and under budget, maybe they could bring other people together,
I think
community
that's
leaders.
the criteria for herding cats, mate. You're able to herd cats. So I thought,
Yeah.
this guy can herd cats, we can get him.
Yeah. So the business side I had down, but this prevention thing I didn't. But I read everything I could get my hands on. One of the things I wanted to do was create a resource library for everybody. And at the time, I mean, we're still talking about, the internet wasn't that big. It was 2000. And we had a paper library. We were pulling things off the internet so people could come in and read and stuff. But everything that went in it was probably 6 bookshelves full of work. And everything that went in it, I read. Then it went in there. So I'm a voracious reader. I catch on really quick. And but I started to see some things that really kind of blew my mind. There was this organization that was in the United States, in San Francisco and New York, funded by one of our acquaintances on the other side, and they were working to legalize at that time ecstasy. And I had been sent to a NIDA conference, and they were talking about how devastating this drug was to the human brain, to anybody. And I remember at this conference, they said, look, somewhere between 1 and 50 pills, you will have irreversible brain damage. And so this neuroscientist that's up there talking, and they're all brain surgeons and stuff. And here I am, and I dared to ask a question. I said, well, can you narrow it down a little bit? 1 to 50 pills. He goes, you know what, Mr. Redman, we could do that. But to do that, we would have to feed a perfectly healthy 15-year-old ecstasy for a time and then cut their brains open. And for some reason, your FDA really frowns upon that type of research. So, of course, he was joking, but he said, look, you want to know between 1 and 50? It's much closer to 1 than to 50. And he said, this drug will never be a medicine. It can't be. It is so harmful to the human brain that whatever positive work one would get out of it just would stop anything for it to be a medicine. But then this organization was promoting the safe use of this drug through a company called Dance Safe, where they would go to raves, they would test it and say, yeah, there's no adulterants in it. This is pure ecstasy. So here you go. Use it.
Wow.
Which would be the worst thing you could do. So I started to see and nobody was doing anything about it. Here we are, a statewide prevention organization that was mostly focused on policy, yet nobody was doing it. And so I don't know. That's where I got bit by the bug and started working on that. And then by 2005, they're trying to legalize marijuana. And by 2008, I'm going to the UN on those issues and realized how important policy was, that we can do a lot on the ground level. And it's important that we do that we have a wide breadth of a campaign. But if we don't do anything about policy, that things in Sacramento, laws that they would change there would bad laws would filter down, and it would and we'd be swimming upstream like bass and maybe dying before we could get to the spotting.
Yeah,
so that's where I started to really, fight on these policies, but yet still working on campaigns and also working on one of my key goals, outcomes at the HIDA was to create programs that would bring people together to look at a region and reduce that. Okay. So that's where all that started.
All right. So we got our dates wrong. Is that right? With the Red Week the Red Ribbon Week campaign.
It's in the third week in October. Is Red Ribbon?
No, we thought it started in the 80s.
So CADFI was started in around 1982.
Right.
It was formally incorporated. There were a number of things, a lot. It was a parent movement. There was, by the mid 80s, Kiki Camarena, he was a DEA agent, and he was kidnapped, tortured, and murdered in Mexicali, Mexico. And it was actually Henry Lozano who was the executive director at the time, and he went down to El Centro, the county just east of us, and started these Kiki clubs. And he brought it to CADFI, and it went the next year statewide. And then from there, a year or two later, it went to National Family Partners, and then it exploded from there. Right.
Okay. So just trying to get the timing and the dates right. That was really important because we don't want to misrepresent anything, but even by accident. That was a concern here. But thanks for that clarification, because it is an important thing. So that Red Ribbon Week that sort of took off, was that an on-flow from that particular event, or is that something separate?
It was from bringing together the issue of Kiki dying. I mean, That was a horrendous time in California. Being a DEA agent in Mexicali, and then it was an acquaintance of his that said, "Hey, get in the car, let's go have lunch." And he wasn't supposed to go alone, but he did. Okay. And the strange thing is that what the cartel wanted from him was his knowledge of the DEA's knowledge of marijuana grows. So anybody that doesn't think that that's an issue is, they're kidding themselves.
Yeah, they're delusional. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing about that is, there's so many misconceptions about drugs in general, including marijuana, how it all works, trafficking. For example, the other side gave a number of reasons why marijuana should be legalized, and it'll fill the coffers. We'll get tons of
a cornucopia of wealth
funds coming in. But also, one of the things we can control it and regulate it and keep it out of the hands of youth. But one of them was we could end the cartels, the drug cartels overnight. And all of these things, when it came time for the legalization of marijuana in 2009 in California, people were asking me this, and I'm thinking, well, what would make you think that? And I eventually went on a kind of a debate campaign all over California, and I would bring these things up, and like, for example, the prohibition part. Well, prohibition didn't work for alcohol, so why would we think that prohibition for marijuana? Because prohibition created the mafia, and marijuana prohibition creating the drug cartels. And I'm like,
no, it didn't.
Yes. Are you smoking what you are trying to?
It's a false dichotomy, and it's completely untrue. Yeah.
Well, and so I said, well, how about this? Name me the top 3 cities in the United States during the 1930s, where 20s and 30s, where the mafia was absolutely horrendously present. And they would go Chicago, New York. The third one was a little hard for them, but New Orleans. Okay, great. Name me the most corrupt cities in the United States in the 30s, 20s and 30s. And they're like, Chicago, everybody knew that. New York. Oh, yeah, New Orleans. And I said, look, it isn't prohibition that is the issue. It's corruption. No matter what, it's corruption. And corruption, whether it's in the United States in Chicago or New York or New Orleans, where all 3 of those cities were horrendously corrupt, or today, down in Mexico, you've got corruption within the government, and the cartels are taking over. There are whole swaths of areas in Mexico where the federal government of Mexico has no control. It's the cartels. And if you look a number of years ago, when the cartels went into Monterey and shot up a disco or a dance club. Sorry, I'm dating myself. But that was all about power of which cartel was going to own Monterey, and it wasn't going to be the federal government. They had no real way to shut it down. So, you really sell your soul when you do that.
There it is. Yep. Yeah, there it is.
So, and that's just one issue, but, I can go through a dozen of them, and they're all, they're not true.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. We did our organization's been around a long, long time. We've got, in fact, over 150-year history in the alcohol and other drug space. And I still remember we did a Delgado research report on the constitutional prohibition in the United States. We have documentation on our shelves, so I could go and get it right now, of the government reporting debrief documents in the late 1930s, original documents of what happened when they did the debrief on the prohibition. And I won't go into all the details, but it was staggering the impact it had. And of course, one of the false dichotomies with the cannabis and the alcohol one is that alcohol has been an entrenched societal institution for millennia. Cannabis has not been. Alcohol is a psychotropic toxin, but not the same as cannabis and what it can do. And it's interesting when you try and what they did with the prohibitions, they didn't say you couldn't drink. That's the fallacy. They're saying that you can't drink alcohol. You can. In fact, one of the things that happened during Prohibition, interestingly enough, because they understood particularly with the Mediterranean cultures, and that came into America, that wine was part of their deal. And during the Prohibition, Bath sales went through the roof because people were making their own alcohol at home. You could brew your own booze at home, drink it at home, but if you took it outside your house, if you were seen with alcohol in public and you were intoxicated in public, you were done. So
or sell it.
You sell it, correct. So there was no open production the sale of a use of alcohol in the public square. That was the Prohibition, and it actually had an incredible impact on so much of the American economy. Cirrhosis of liver issues disappeared, domestic violence shifted, employment and employment records were going up. It was just, and the report that was done by this was staggering.
Divorce rates went down.
Correct.
Child abandonment went down.
Correct.
So when they say it wasn't a success, well, compared to what? What's your litmus test there? So public health wise, it was a massive success. Went down. Cirrhosis of the liver went down to almost nothing.
Correct.
Almost nothing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The grassroots movement that came out in the West of America from the Native American sectors. They're the ones who started the push early on, and of course Wayne Wheeler, who was who was said of him that no president would be elected in the 1920s and 30s without Wayne Wheeler's approval, and he was the one who mobilised the Midwest, particularly the Protestant movement, to really get a hold of this. And so there was an incredible movement. It wasn't just a moral issue. It was a public health issue. It was a public safety issue. It was a productivity issue, and it did work. But we won't spend a lot of time on that. But you're dead right. So now we're going to introduce a new psychotropic toxin into the currents of trade. And one of the things that I'm going to jump ahead a bit here, and we'll go back and visit some of these other questions later on. But with this in 1996, that was kind of the era. What happened before that with the Nancy Reagan's "Just Say No to Drugs," which is all mocked by the so-called woke elite, neo-woke elite, is hilarious. It worked spectacularly well. It did an incredible job when it was in full flight. In fact, substance use was declining rapidly because in the 70s, particularly cannabis in America was huge. It was, up until recently, it was the highest cannabis rate in American history at that stage, until this campaign came in and other activities that slowed this thing right down. It was disappearing, like cannabis use amongst the young, until in the mid-90s, early 90s, when NORML, the National Organization for Reform of Marijuana Laws, did their big push and said we're going to use the Trojan horse of cannabis as medicine to get it back into the system. And once they introduced the medical Trojan horse idea, cannabis use started to move. And of course, in 1996, they actually, I would argue, they instituted officially California sober. This whole, look, we're using medicine to do it. We're going to avoid alcohol use by getting everyone on medical marijuana. And since that point in time, that Proposition 215, I think it is, they're called the Compassionate Use Act, which is always hilarious. And what it is, it began to take off. And of course, cannabis use began to grow. And under that faux title and that scientifically not backed regimen of vote for medicine legalisation, which we've seen also in Australia and other jurisdictions, this thing started to take off again. So we've got this contagion, working aggressively. And you said the cartels.
I want to go back just on one point on that. So if you look at in the late 70s, they were pushing for, obviously, 72, and Macron and all those guys in California government are pushing for that. And they were, and NORML was having an effect, and they're looking at, by 1978, they're ready to go and legalize marijuana. But it was too little too late, because by 78, 79, there was this new drug that came on the market, and it was non-addictive. It was there was no harms to it at all. It was the perfect drug for the 80s. And what was that drug? Cocaine.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you've got Lynn Bias, who was you know, he was a college basketball star, and he was going to be the first Michael Jordan, but he was taking cocaine, and on the court, his heart just gave out because of cocaine. And then you had Richard Pryor running out of his house like a lit match, and other things that, John Belushi, all of these things happened around then, and there was a huge negative pushback to all drugs, including marijuana. And so they really had to start all over again. And but also remember, back on that prohibition, there was another thing that you left out. You could drink it yourself, but if you had a medical need, you could go into a drugstore in the United States and purchase medicinal alcohol.
Okay.
And look that up. And so what the cannabis industry did, the advocates, they took that
model
and game plan along with one other, and launched a new campaign on this medicinal use.
Yeah.
Of marijuana.
So the cocaine interrupter sort of slowed the momentum of the push, but then again, as I said, normal really took it up again and used again the Trojan horse, and that's exactly what it is, a Trojan horse. And it created. You put the word medicinal in front of any substance, it creates a permission model and a contagion. And it's an aggressive contagion, and it's a really sinister one, because not only is it completely false, because even the argument now, we all know what's happened since we've unleashed the vote for medicine model. It's proven to be absolutely disastrous, and there's no new, other than Epidiolex or Epidiolex, which is a pharmaceutical grade cannabis, it's a product, cannabis-based product, that's only added to the existing 2 or 3 medicines that are on the table already that have been there since the 70s. So we've was it $5 billion plus investment to date in trying to find this substance, and we'll talk a little bit later on about your involvement in that space in recent years, John.
Sure.
But so we got this momentum, this propaganda machine, the propaganda machine, that just sowing this contagion into the culture. And of course, the grown-ups buy it, kids follow suit. It's for all sorts of reasons. So we've got this real problem. And again, the work of CADFI and the work of others in the prevention and supply and demand reduction space are having to contend with that contagion on top of the normal issues around social so-called subcultural tribalism and all the aspects of your rebellion and engagement in substance experimentation, all that stuff that goes on. That's considered normal, which it's not, but that's another factor in play. But when you add this medicinal factor to that, it becomes really problematic. It's not just a layered issue; it's a multiplication factor. So pushing back against that's a problem. But I want to talk about some of the experiences you guys have had. Again, going back to the cartels, because I think one of the issues that, and you raised it beautifully, John, is the idea that, and that same narrative has been sold in every jurisdiction that's tried to legalize cannabis. You're going to get cash, the illicit trade will disappear, cartels will be robbed of their whatever, which is completely false, and it's been proven clearly to be false. In fact, cartel activity has grown as a result of the so-called legalized cannabis industry in your jurisdiction, at least, anyway.
Yeah.
So you've had peers and colleagues actually do some pretty serious incursions from a prevention and demand reduction and recovery perspective into Mexico. Are you able to talk a little bit about those experiences and the impact that's had even in those horrendous places of completely dominated by drug-taking culture?
Well, I was there at the HIDA for only about 3 years, and the HIDA director called me in and he said, the DEA wants to do this binational initiative, working with people in Mexico along with us on the border. And I said, well, you're talking to the wrong guy. I barely passed Spanish in college. And I don't know if I've retained 3 words in Spanish.
Right.
And I'm just, culturally ignorant. I think that's a bad idea for me to do anything. But thanks for the consideration, and kind of left. And then the next day he called me back in and he goes, okay, so I want to talk about, this binational initiative. And I go, well, I thought we did yesterday. He goes, yeah. But, the DEA really wants you to take this over. They know that they can't do it, and it's very important to them. And I went, yeah, but I'm not the guy. So it was actually the third day. The next day he called me and he goes, all right, are we ready to begin? And I said, he would not take no for an answer. And I said, look, all right, I get it. You want me to run this, but you are going to have to hire me a Mexican national that's also an American citizen, has dual citizenship, speaks perfect English, perfect Spanish, or at least, understandable English and perfect Spanish, and has connections that I don't have. And we do that, and I'm in. And he goes, fine.
Wow. Can do.
So we started, it was called the Binational Campaign. And at that time, and we're talking the early 2000s, like 2004, 4, methamphetamine was the huge issue in San Diego. We were the meth capital of the United States. We had 95, I think, % of the super labs of the United States.
Oh, wow.
And what had happened was the MET team, the mobile enforcement team, had gone into San Diego, into the rural areas. Mostly the avocado grows up in northern San Diego County, and got into the labs and took them out. And was very successful. Took out, I don't think there was another meth lab there. But within a year, it had moved from San Diego County east to the county east of San Diego, Imperial County, and the labs cropped up there. No pun intended. So the Met team went over there and took them out, and problem solved. Except 2 years later, methamphetamine seizures coming across the border tripled in 2 years. So what had happened was the drug cartels were going, well, if you're not going to make it, we'll make it. And they did. And I went over there, I met with the youth treatment facilities in Tijuana, and 70% of the youth treatment facilities the youth were in there for methamphetamine. Now, that was very strange to us because meth is an adult drug in the United States. We're construction workers and housewives were using it.
It's a poor man's cocaine. That's the
construction workers were doing it because at the time there was a issue, and the economic issue, and then so they were trying to retain their jobs and work, like supermen. And Correct. A lot of the wives were taking diet pills, which were, ephedrine, and then which turns into methamphetamine in the body, and so they were getting addicted and going from diet pills to methamphetamine. But it was still over 35 years of age. Kids would go, oh, I'm not going to be a tweaker. What are you kidding? Yet you've got Tijuana youth in there. And that's because they were pulling them out of high school, and they were the mules.
Yep, there it is.
And going and getting that across the border. And if they got caught, they were still juveniles, so it wasn't so bad for them. They weren't going to be, in jail for the rest of their lives. But the cartels were paying them not in cash, but in, a piece of the product, which then they divided up and sold, most of it to their friends, but then retained some for themselves, and then they became addicted. So we had this just horrendous problem of youth addiction on methamphetamine. And so we worked on a statewide, Baja California statewide prevention campaign to get people to understand about the problems of meth and drug cartels and those issues, and it was very successful. It reduced quite substantially the amount of it became more problematic for cartels to recruit kids, and the youth consumption down quite a bit, so substantially.
Yeah, yeah.
And then, we worked on other things, but that's where it, again, this policy issue and working with, cross-border. The thing that people don't understand is the border's the border, but, Mexican nationals come over every day, youth, to go to school. You can, if you're a Mexican national, you can go to an American school. You just have to pay the tuition for it. Also, workers that have green cards, they go back and forth. They don't have to live in the United States necessarily. And, you've got Americans that live across the border. There's also ranches that are on both sides of the border, just divided by a river. So, in terms of population, what does the fence really mean, and economically and drug-wise, that's a very porous thing. So
porous is the good word. Yeah. I get that. You had some peers that I remember having a chat with you a while back. They did some recovery work, and they were very successful at it. And the cartels tried to buy them off, and they landed some money on a high-level bureaucrat's desk or something. And tell us a little bit about that scenario.
Well, in any company, and I'll just state it this way,
sure.
Money, a portion of that money is used for marketing, and then above that, lobbying. Yeah. So whether it's IBM wanting to go to politicians and give them money for their campaigns, which they desperately need to run their campaigns and stay in office, or it's drug cartels that use that money to do the same thing. The worst is the tobacco industry, that they undersell a product in terms of its harm. They target youth. Why? Because if you can target youth, get them before they're out of high school, you have them for life.
Correct.
It's very, very difficult to get to get them off of it in terms of treatment. Nicotine is, as you well know, one of the most addictive drugs. And so you look at the tobacco industry, the Joe Camel campaign, all of that, or kids going into a tobacco store, a cigarette shop, and they're not supposed to get a single one, but Philip Morris, or well, it wasn't Philip Morris, but I'll not implicate a certain one, but the tobacco industry would pay that $1,000 fine to that smoke shop, that cigarette shop, tobacco store, so that they could go ahead and sell to underage kids. Because they wanted them for life.
Once they get it, that's addiction for profit.
Yeah, and so, and then you look at the marijuana industry. They're just taking that tobacco playbook, doing the same thing. And once you hook those kids, then you make money, then you market, and then you lobby to politicians. Now you have more freedom to do what you want, and then start that circle all over again. So what's the difference between the drug cartels, or the tobacco industry, or the
alcohol industry, for that matter?
Alcohol industry, it's all the same. And the marijuana industry is now just taking that playbook and doing it. And so once we get used to that, then and normalize that, then what's the next drug of choice? And I know that people are starting to look at ecstasy, going to microdosing, and that would be okay. And, well, will it? And
psilocybin's the other one. Yep. Magic mushrooms. Yep. The psychedelics, that's the idea, which is now also running into its own set of problems because, again, the same thing, Vote for Medicine in Australia, kicked that off, even surprised the psychedelic industry. They weren't ready for it. And TGA did this whole thing they did with cannabis here, gave it a special free pass for medicinal use through certain clinics. but it's now so creating all sorts of problems, as we know, because microdosing is dangerous. Doesn't work. But yeah,
I think the key to all of these problems is that if we in prevention are just doing community awareness campaigns, and CATFI could be looked at that as well. The Red Ribbon is an awareness campaign, but if that's all you're doing, you're going to fail. So you've got to do a whole breadth of a strategy of work that eventually has to get to the most bang for the buck, which is policy change. We have to start looking ahead to all of these things. We can't. What we do in prevention is play catch up constantly. Come on, we've known that the marijuana industry has been trying to get in and legalize it for, since the 70s, and yet we do nothing until 2009, really, substantially. I mean, there was some stuff at around 2005, but and then we're kind of blindsided. So what's the next industry? And we can't just sit here and be blindsided by it. We have to, for once, get in front of it, or we're,
So what you're advocating for, and we completely concur with this, John, is top-down, bottom-up education and advocacy. Advocacy is just an aggressive form of education that challenges narrative creation. I think that's where it's important to do both, and I love the fact that CATFI does that. And I just wanted to, we talked about that conversation we had just about that cartel that landed $1 million on that bureaucrat's desk as a bribe, and he turned around to the camera and said, "Oh, we had a wonderful donation from the local businesses," and spun it on them, which is a fantastic story. But the thing that I think is really, really important here is that all these factors are strategic in shifting culture. And what CATFI does, and I wanted to speak to this more proactively here, because you do advocate from top down, bottom up. So community awareness campaigns and community mobilization is effective, and you've experienced that. Can you tell us a little bit about, that combination of factors and how you've seen that work, even though there's been as you've indicated, it's been tricky, and we're dealing with multi-billion-dollar industries who have voracious in the way they act. Only small actors, but really very well funded, and pushing back against that with grassroots campaigns is tricky. But we've seen a bit of that, and you've had some success in that space. Tell us about how they work together, grassroots, community-based campaigns, as well as the policy engagement area.
Yeah, our campaign to stop the legalization of marijuana in California was a grassroots campaign. It was very successful. They had millions of dollars. They had $3 million. We had $300,000. That was it. So they had 10 to 1. The issue, the hardest thing about community mobilization is getting everybody to be on the same page.
Yeah,
and pushing that and pushing that and pushing those messages. One of the things that we get so wrong in prevention is that we talk about the ethereal. We talk about the war on drugs and how, if we do this and legalize that, then, the Chicken Little, the sky is falling, kids are going to eat each other's faces off. And I mean, sometimes we go so far out, so outlandish that people don't hear our message. So the issue is to look at the issue, kind of test market it. What about this, and how, with a group, and we paid for a professional company to come in and test market issues and stuff, and came up with what people would hear. But the issue is that, when we're out there in prevention land, which we should be in a community effort, we're really talking holistic and all of the problems of drugs and all of that. But when then there's a targeted campaign, you have to treat it like that and focus in on what are they trying to do and what are you specifically trying to stop. And if you broaden that out to whatever, then you're going to fail. So if you've got on Prop 64, we had there trying to legalize marijuana, but that was one page. And it left all kinds of things out in the open to figure out later. And I remember going to, I wasn't allowed to lobby. I couldn't go out there and tell them how to vote. But I was at this law school, and they're kids, they're saying, well, what's the problem and what's the big deal? And the message that we had settled on was, okay, if you think that legalizing marijuana is a good idea, fine, but this isn't the way to do it. This is one page, and it doesn't deal with this issue, that issue, transportation, pesticides, all kinds of things that it doesn't deal with. So do you think this is the best way? And some of the kids were, young adults, they were challenging me, and I said, okay, wait, all of you've got 200 budding lawyers, future lawyers in this room. If your professor said, go and write me up a bill that legalizes marijuana, and you came back with this, and I held it up, one page, how many of you would get a passing grade? Raise your hand, and be prepared, because I'm going to ask you things. Not a single person raised their hand. So now you're dealing with the specific issue, and you have a shot at it. But if you start talking about the prohibition of marijuana and the mafia of the 20s and 30s, and all of this other stuff, your message is going to be lost. So and then once you get that, these aren't campaign workers that you're paying. These are volunteers, and it is like herding cats.
Yeah.
But you get them in, explain to them what you're trying to do, give them the one-page messaging, and you can move it forward. Yeah. There was a state that I was asked to go to that was looking at legalizing marijuana, and it was a state that culturally I had no connection with, and they wanted me to go up and speak before their assembly, and I went, I can't do it. But what I can do is I will come back if you want me. I'll come back, and for a week I will train you up, and then you go speak. You guys go speak, and that's what we did. And we had it was the group that we had together. We had a couple of radio station executives. We had the television station executive for the region. We had faith-based communities, a couple of politicians, local politicians, and trained them up in like 4 days. And they went to speak before the assembly. And the gentleman that was doing it was a former, pretty high up politician. And he was back, and he was very popular. They all went up to speak, all of them. And by the end of the day, it was voted down. Bringing people together, getting them to stay on the same message. Sometimes you have individuals that want to kind of go off script, and you have to, herd them back in.
I think that's an important thing. I mean, we talk about one focus, one message, one voice. So that, and it's like in our drug policy space in Australia, we have the National Drug Strategy, which is about to be reviewed, which will be interesting to see what happens. But we have, three. We've talked about this before, so my listeners are quite, conversant with this. But we have the three substances: tobacco, alcohol, and illicit drugs. With tobacco, there's one voice, one message, one focus. That's quit. Every department, every sector, education, media, health, law enforcement, all on the exact same page. There's only one message, and that is quit. Cessation is the goal. Yes, there's a journey to cessation. Yes, it can be interrupted, but that doesn't shift the goal. We don't change the goal because certain aspects of that journey to cessation didn't work. When it comes to alcohol, we shifted that recently to moderation. It used to be just a carte blanche. Now it's moderate. Think about it. There's a lot of factors, health factors have been brought in to mitigate, the lobbying of the alcohol industry, the cancer factor. So that's shifted the attitude as well. But when it comes to the illicit drugs, the message is different, completely different. It's keep using, just don't die. Keep using, just don't die, because there's no way we can stop 3 to 4% of the population using illicit drugs. We have to let it off the leash. And again, you can see the power of the lobbying and what we call the cannabis canard, the false narratives that they create, and again these dichotomies. And this is what you've just done, and what you've just elucidated in your mechanism for advocacy is that you create awareness by challenging the assumptions, not trying to create a new set of alarms that may go off. Alarms are important in the right context. With our Quit campaign of tobacco, it works. The alarm factor worked alongside the others first. Generate awareness, help them understand how really, really quite bad this is. Then they had the shock campaign, and boom, those two things work together. Just going for, as you said, eat their faces off kind of drama, high-level drama, and the shock value, it's like people get overrun with that. But when you generate a series of questions, an investigative interrogation of a position without being adversarial, simply asking, as you did beautifully, so tell us about this. Tell us about your sector. How does your sector view this? How does that work? Would that fly? Does this hold water? The basic epistemology of, is it cohesive, coherent, and pragmatic? Does it hold together? Does it make sense? And does it work? And if those basic interrogations unravel the position of a person, then all of a sudden you've got an in. And that quiet and the dissertation that comes from that is presented to a policy-making body. They go, oh, this doesn't work. It doesn't work. You don't have to wait for it to fail, as it's done in so many of your states who have legalized it with those, pro-pot canards, this whole, this is going to be fantastic. And now they're realizing that that's all false. They are the ones who've used narrative incorrectly and inappropriately. And that's unfurled in a way that wasn't good. And now the states are backpedaling. I think Massachusetts is, Maine's looking at it. They're starting to go, this was a mistake. So that's a great thing. So advocacy, community awareness, getting groups together on the same page, training them to interrogate the data, and then present it in a logical, reasonable, and fair-minded way is one of the key aspects of that. I really like that, John. I think that's really good. When it comes to young people, how did you go getting them on this bandwagon? I'm talking sort of 16 to 20, 23-year-olds. What were some of the secrets there for you?
Well, in terms of the marijuana campaign, we used youth from the coalitions from around the state that had them. And we did training. We did a debate training, which I presented. We also did we did a lobbying training session. What is lobbying? What's advocacy? The difference, and so and then messaging training. All of so we were all trained up, and we had key. We stratified it, so we had key colonels, at the top, and their captains and lieutenants, and down to the youth that were trained up. So
perfect.
We were able to do that, and then they could go in and talk to the youth, and then some of those youth would talk to their parents. Hopefully, the issue, but getting into something like that is daunting, because remember, none of us are getting paid for that kind of thing. That was the work of that campaign was outside my normal job.
Yeah.
Because I just couldn't be. So I was doing things in the morning before work. I would then do things at lunch, and then my 5 o'clock on, I was doing things, taking time off to fly to different locations to debate or whatever. It was daunting. And at the end of it, that was pretty rough.
It's demanding. Again, it takes a toll. It does take a toll, my friend. Yeah, I understand that.
The thing is, I brought everybody together, and we'll go back to that prohibition issue, and which is part of the corruption thing. If you ever watch The Untouchables, the LES thing with Sean Connery's he's the beat cop that's on his team, and Elliot Ness just wants to go in and raid stuff. He goes into raid and nobody's there, and he's telling Sean Connery, he's all upset, and he goes, he goes, yeah, well, and he's really talking about the corruption. Everybody knows. They know
Yeah.
when you're coming into raid. They know everything. And he goes, well, can't we stop that? And Sean Connery's on the team, but it's like, I'm not doing anything and then he realizes that Elliot Ness really wants to affect change.
Change, yeah.
And he turns to him and he says, what are you prepared to do?
Huh.
And he goes, what are you talking about? Whatever. He goes, no. What are you prepared to do? And when we brought everybody to the location to start to meet, and we were going to meet starting out once a month and then every other week and then finally every week until we got it. But what are you prepared to do? Are you guys prepared to go all the way, to come in every day, to meet, to deal with things? And that's what it takes to fight corruption. What are you prepared to do?
Yeah.
Hey, before we continue, we want to highlight an excellent cousin podcast you should definitely check out. Pathways to Prevention with Dave Clausen. Dave brings incredible, proactive and protective insights that really complement the work we're doing here at UHP. That's Pathway number 2, Prevention. Make sure you subscribe and give it a listen. Now, back to UHP.
And that is, like, all of us in the sector that, because we're fighting against, often, certainly well-funded, what I call misanthropes. And they're, the global anarchists that, want to legalise, decriminalise, release psychotropic substances on an already incredibly fragile culture, and particularly in the First World West, and in a traumatised culture in other cultures as well, as some sort of faux solution. And it's chaotic. But the pushback against that does require a level of commitment that it is demanding. And I think part of the what I'm hearing from you, and certainly what we try and inculcate in the people we work with, we don't even use the word volunteers anymore. We use the term paid and unpaid staff. Volunteers always seem to have an opportunity to exit, whereas staff don't. So now, obviously, we have to treat them certainly a little bit differently. But the idea that again, what is your innate a priori drivers here? And we're understanding that the scope of the problem can be off-putting, can be daunting, as you said. But once you've got a coalition of people and you understand what is happening and you can see clearly the outcomes that are already in play, that alone is a driver. But obviously, something beyond that is necessary for us all. And you've mentioned yourself, faith. Others have mentioned that as well, is faith-based enterprises, because you've got a context of meaning and of purpose and of direction and of resourcing to be able to engage more effectively. But I think the key here is, again, that constant top-down, bottom-up, team-focused, on the same page, singing from the same sheet. No cowboys, no wannabe heroes, no wannabe, again, this is community. This is us protecting us from the contagion that is unraveling our entire society. And I think once that sort of message begins to sort of infect the culture in a positive way, then we see the change, because it becomes organic and it becomes an automatic response. One of the quotes that we have is, resilient communities don't use drugs, resilient families don't want them. And it's as simple as that. You bump into these communities, these families, they just don't engage. But once you mobilise them with their position and help them become, as advocates and educators, that's a different story. John, I just wanted to, we're running out, so this has been really great, man. We're running out of space here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about and as much as you can, I mean, I understand some of the political machinations in this space. You looked at and were approached by the cannabis industry, the genuine pharmaceutical industry, to looking at cannabis. And it's, like I said, there's in $5 billion worth to date of investment in this space. And we've had one genuine medicine that's emerged from that's added to the existing ones. Two, okay, which we'll talk about.
There's Sativex and Epidiolex.
Oh, yeah, no, but I was saying a new one. So the new one was Epidiolex or Epidiolex. That's the new one that was created by GW Pharma, now taken over by Jazz Pharmaceuticals. But prior to that, there was Sativex, there was Dramadol, there was, which are basically symptom abatement medications. as is
Marinol
epidural.
was that's been around since I think the 80s, and it's
70s.
but it's
Yep.
synthetic.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
plant-based.
So but the point being is, the proclamations of the pro-cannabis lobby were for normal with one of the biggest voices for this. This is the panacea of all ills. All we need to do is let it off the chain, give it some oxygen. It'll take off. It'll cure everything. And all the promises that have been made have failed. We've had 50 years of promises, but it is a complex plant. It has the entourage effect. There's all sorts of factors which I won't go into today if our listeners get tedious with that one. But there's this connection, and it's a very wise way. Again, the same principle you've applied here with demand reduction and community involvement, you're applying in the sector where you're going, let's scrutinise the mechanism, not attack it. Let's scrutinise it in a way that'll help it develop the best possible products it can for public health benefit, and that which is not going to benefit the public health, that which is going to undermine public health, can be properly dealt with, eviscerated from the public square, because it doesn't work, and there's no doubt about it. There's no anecdata flying around that says, oh no, the pharmaceuticals are controlling the narrative and number. All that's gone because we got actually good medicine being in play. Tell us a little bit about that journey with you, if you can.
Yeah, I was actually in 2017, I was ready to retire, and I got a phone call that the United Nations was evaluating marijuana for the first time, because it hadn't been really delved into even from the beginning of the treaties, the 61 treaty. So they wanted to do a critical review by the ECDD, and so they asked me to take a look at that. Would I go back to the UN, which I thought I was retiring. I didn't have to do that anymore.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, and I agreed. I had to testify before the Food and Drug Administration, and then the next week was Vienna, and I said, okay, I'll go over there, and then I'll just look into it. So I did, and there was a lot of questions that I had, and one of the issues that the WHO, World Health Organization, was putting forth was that CBD was a benign drug. It wasn't harmful. It wasn't addictive. All of this stuff, and so what we want to do is we want to take that and pull it out of the out of the regulatory system and put it in like kind of the health food industry or the
supplements, not medicine,
supplement industry.
Yeah.
So and they were allowing a certain amount of THC that could be in it because it was hard to separate and all that.
Yeah, the entourage effect. Yep. So
I brought that back, and I had known some of the people at GW Pharmaceuticals for a few years. When we had at our height the National Marijuana Initiative, and I was the demand reduction person for that, and kind of going all over the country in that regard. And we were also putting on conferences. The NMI was putting on marijuana conferences more, on the supply reduction side, but a little bit on the other side. And that's where I first met somebody from GW who were just there, and they were talking to me about their product, and so I was very, very skeptical. I just thought it was a way around it. But they flew me out to their location and was showing me what they were doing, and I was intrigued, that they were doing it right. They were
Correct.
looking at the issues, because there were a lot of questions coming up. There were changes within the common law in certain countries because people were just saying, they're not guilty on a number of things, it was effectively changing their laws on their Controlled Substance Act within their different countries. So GW was looking into that and said, well, you know what, there's actually something here. Let's research it. And they did. And they found a couple of things that worked. And ran it through the regulatory system, just like any other drug. And so I was impressed of
Proper
what they
medicine.
were doing,
Yep.
how they were doing it. But when I brought this issue, I go, so they were the leaders of research in that industry, and very pioneering at the time. And so I asked them, okay, here's what they're saying, and here's the list of data, but they're saying it's your data from your research. Is that true? And they said, no, it is not true. And I said, well, you need to tell them. And they said, we did.
Wow. Wow.
And yet, so I wrote up some things to present to the UN.
Sorry, just clarify that. Sorry, John. So who, World Health Organization, were fed data certain concerns about the offerings that are in play and the need for proper research and medical process, but they were either ignored or they were adopted without clarification. Is that right?
Right. So the issue, and you can look at it one of two ways. You can look at it from a skeptical position, saying they knew what they were doing and they just continued on, or you could say they did the research that they did, the report, and that was it, and they submitted it, and then you can decide what you want to do with it.
Right.
And their job was done. I have my own views on that, which I probably shouldn't express on your podcast.
Sure.
But yeah, I have my own opinions. But we, so I asked, because we have consultative status, I asked for a position to speak, and so I did that at the C&D, not in the normal session, but in an intersessional meeting, because they weren't clarifying their issues, their positions. They pretty much said, well, here it is. You either vote on it or not.
Yeah,
we don't care.
Wow.
So I thank them for their efforts in looking into this. However, they had made some mistakes. I checked with GW Pharmaceuticals, and here's where we have some questions. And here's where your data is not correct. Your math is incorrect. And so it was, and all that kind of blew up. But it took another year and a half. And by the time of the vote, I think there are 53 countries that are part of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs that vote on drug policy. And there were only, I want to say, I can't remember, there was 4 or 6 that voted for this to go on, and then the rest voted no. So it was a bloodbath on what they were trying to do. And the issue was that CBD is not benign. There's
it's not.
Over a dozen side effects and issues.
Absolutely.
The most critical is liver toxicity. And we had a gentleman here in the United States that he really cares about adult access to medicines. And so he was saying, hey, CBD, it's great. It'll make you younger. It's all this. But CBD to adults, usually adults start to have liver failure as they get older. My mother recently passed away from liver failure. And giving CBD to an elderly person like that is death. It'll just, they'll get a fast train to the grave. So there were a lot of issues that just weren't coming out on this. And and
there's more sense too. More sense, trust me on that one. Yeah. On CBD.
Right. So the issue was, could we stop the vote, which we did, and then educate them, which we did for another half year, which they decided not to vote the next year, and then the following year vote. But if you can delay that and then really educate them with the science of it and the knowledge of it, people will do the right thing. And that's eventually what happened. Unfortunately, by doing that campaign, there were so many questions, and there are possibilities of the cannabinoids within the plant to create future medicines. So what we had done, though, is we had taken it so far that nobody even believed that. So we had to go back and re-educate people, saying, look, this is bad. But if you go through the normal process that all the countries have, including the United Nations, we'll be fine. And if we stick to that, continue to do that regulatory process, that scrutiny, that level of scrutiny for any drug, then we're fine. And so that's kind of the last few years what we went back to just try to explain that. But making sure that the scrutiny is there for all drugs.
Absolutely. And that's the correct pharmaceutical investigative process. And this is the thing that the Vote for Medicine regimen actually, basically sabotage the entire process. And then once you've got this addiction for profit so-called medicine, which has not been properly vetted, not been properly pharmaceutically tested, as Epidiolex and Sativex and others have been, put through the regulatory process, thoroughly vetted, and then released with all the caveats involved, all the warnings that every medicine has. Panadol's got its warning. That's important. And you have an informed choice about a properly scientifically graded medicinal product that is only under prescription for certain elements, not this carte blanche. This will cure everything from, cancer to bad toenails, which is just completely outrageous. But again, the propaganda is very powerful. Go, John.
Yeah, so let me give you a thought for you and your listeners. So we've educated people on a number of things, but yet we still have marijuana legalization in half the states here in the United States. And people love to just look at that whole thing and say, look, half the states, you get, 50 states, 26 states have legalization plus this and this or more now. But of those states, how many are just CBD, where they said, we're not even looking at that. So now you've got that really narrowed down, and now it's just CBD. But a lot of the states that say, okay, we'll allow you to sell CBD, but it's got to be within a certain amount, like through the Farm Bill, which is 2%.
Yeah.
To get to that 2% THC requires pharmaceutical grade knowledge, money, and machinery to get to that, to pull out all of that THC to get to that less than 2%. You look at GW Pharmaceutical, which is now bought out by Jazz Pharma. They're the THC that's left in the consumer product is 0.01%.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. I mean, and that's just, that's a couple of molecules.
This is not Charlotte's Web.
Right, exactly. And I don't know what they're at now. I remember when I was dealing with them about 5-6 years ago, they got it down to 18% THC content, which was, like, are you kidding me? That's a lot. So
18%. Wow, just nuts.
Now people are starting to realize the amount of THC that could be, put into, or allowed to remain in CBD. But CBD is being kind of not regulated because it's just this vitamin thing. So, like in my hometown of San Diego, you've got these places that are selling water, like for offices in the little coolers.
Oh, yeah.
But it's CBD water.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Genotoxic CBD. Thank you.
So, great. Are there heavy metals in that?
Yeah.
What's the THC content?
Yeah.
And what's the CBD content?
Yeah.
None of that. It's just buy CBD water. Now they've got these little ceramic things that you put the big plastic jugs on, but yet we all know that marijuana, it's whether it's CBD or THC, it's very fatty.
Yeah.
And sticky, right? We know that.
Fat soluble, yeah.
So in that jug of water, as it's gone down by half, where's that ring of fat? It's not there. So I'm guessing there's not hardly any CBD at all in there. But when you sell the gummies or this or that, what's the THC content? So now you guys have an opportunity, if they say, okay, you can sell CBD, but only with this small amount of THC, I guarantee you go into any shop. Texas allows the sale of CBD great. But it's only 2%. Go into a shop, test it. And I bet you it's way over that. And anybody could go in at any time and shut it down. So what people have given up on the marijuana thing, don't. Because they are hanging by a thread to keep it, because people are now seeing the problems of marijuana, and they're reversing their opinion. Look at Oregon and all of their laws that got changed, where they went too far and screwed up on. So, this isn't over. Nobody has to give up yet.
No. Absolutely. That's one of the reasons we got you on, John.
Still there, and what are you prepared to do?
Correct. That's a great line. And look, I will round it off there, because like I said, there's a lot more we could talk about. Really love the insights, John. That's one of the reasons we wanted to get you on, because of that national and international perspective and your willingness. And I think anybody in the in the pro-pot sector, the pro-pot protagonists that think that, anyone who's against cannabis is just some sort of, nutty fundamentalist anti-drug campaigner. That's not the case at all. Everything we do is evidence-based, it's informed, and it's also outcome-based. We are seeing, and you have seen very, very clearly, the outcomes of these, not just bad policy and bad practice, but any psychotropic toxin that's unleashed onto the community is always going to do damage and create unnecessary harm. And that's what we're all about here, avoiding unnecessary harm. But so, look, thanks for doing that. Thanks for the insights. Thanks for, being candid. And I know you were a little bit, you were reserved in some areas, and I acknowledge and honour that, because you're towing on some political lines here. So thanks for your discretion there, John. We do appreciate that. There's one question we asked 99% of our guests, before we leave. It is that the fence or the ambulance? The fence at the top of the cliff or the ambulance at the bottom, or is it a combination? Your take.
Say that again. It's the what?
The fence at the top of the cliff or the ambulance at the bottom of the cliff? Oh. Is it one or the other, or is it a combination of both? Right.
I'll do this through a story.
An anecdote. Here we go. Come on.
So there were three shepherds watching over their flock. And they start just walking downstream. And they notice all of a sudden some of their sheep had gotten into the river and were being washed down. And across the river on the other side of the bank were a pack of wolves, and they were grabbing some of them out and devouring them. But one of the shepherds had a sling and started to use his sling to kill the wolves. That is enforcement all the way. Another shepherd jumped into the river to pull out as many as he could, to treat them and get them out, treatment. While they were doing that, another one went upstream. And afterwards, there was no one coming down. There were no more sheep coming down. And the two shepherds went up, and he had closed the gate on the pen to stop the rest of the sheep from going downriver. That's prevention. So what's the best way? All of them are needed.
Correct.
All of them are needed. But if we can start at the beginning and really care about our children and our communities and the people within it and the policies that we have around it,
beautiful,
we can do incredible things.
Perfect. Great way to end this podcast, John. John Redman, thank you again for being part of our little project here at the Delgado Institute, the Unnecessary Harm podcast. And to those listening in, until next time, we encourage you to continue, even as John just shared, be part of the solution, build resiliency into your communities, wherever that may be, in whatever context you find yourself. It could be a family, it could be a neighborhood, it could be a school. Build resiliency into your communities and help us all avoid the pointless and unnecessary harm. Until next time, do that. Bye.
As we wrap up today's session, remember, each step towards understanding is a step away from unnecessary harm. We're here to empower, inspire, and pave the way for optimal well-being. Stay resilient, stay informed, and continue being the change your community needs. Thank you for joining us at the Unnecessary Harm Podcast. Until next time, take care and keep pushing forward.